Joy and pride for Laurel Hubbard. The New Zealand weightlifter is set to be the first transgender athlete to compete at the Olympics. On Sport on Lot, we'll unpick the debate about the fairness of trans athletes in women's sports and the policies of the governing bodies.
We failed Laurel, just like I was failed as an athlete all those years ago, where I was violated and now a survivor and having to live with the impact of this.
Kristen Worley is an advisor to Olympic chiefs. We'll speak to the transgender cyclist about her legal action that alleged gender verification policies were discriminatory. There's also insight from the sports scientist, Ross Tucker.
She's abiding by the rules. I just think that those rules aren't fit for purpose.
It's the issue dividing the sports world as Laurel Hubbard prepares for a groundbreaking appearance at the Olympics.
People who are arguing for an even more extreme approach, which is really that you should simply identify. Now, if that were to happen, then women's sport would effectively end.
Welcome to the podcast with a definitive digest on the week's sports news with interviews and analysis. I'm Rob Harris from the Associated Press, and alongside me as ever is Martyn Ziegler from The Times.
Hi Rob, yeah, great to be with you again. We've got an action-packed podcast, some of the most divisive issues in sport to come up. Not least the scrapping of the UEFA's away goals rule after 56 years. Which side of the fence are you on, Tariq Panja of the New York Times?
Nice to be with you guys again. Thanks for having me on. Looking at UEFA's reasonings, I suppose it makes a bit of sense. They think these away trips aren't as daunting as they used to be. It's easier to travel. It's comfortable. Standardization of pitches. Referees are perhaps better trained, and they're not kind of the home side's ref as far as the away team's concerned, etc. And maybe they think the home teams don't attack enough in those legs. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, the complete farce of the away goals rule was last season when we had some teams playing both games on neutral territory, yet away goals still counting.
Well, for those who are not too sure what the away goals rule actually was, it's been used in UEFA competitions since 1965, where if the score in a two-legged match was level on aggregate at the end of those 180 minutes of play, then the winner was the team who had scored more away goals. And there have been plenty of examples of where the scores have been, 3-3, 4-4. And most recently, I think Bayern Munich were knocked out by Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League quarterfinals, where the score was 4-4 in aggregate, but Paris Saint-Germain had scored 3 away goals and Bayern Munich only 1.
Do you think this is going to be a bunch of penalty shootouts now, or do you think that we're going to genuinely see some sort of different football?
I think it's definitely going to have to mean more penalty shootouts, and maybe there'll be more attacking football, but just by the very reason that these matches aren't going to be decided on the pitch anymore in normal time. So there's bound to be, which is not great news for sports journalists who A, are going to be struggling with deadlines, and B, can't start finalising their report until the end of the penalty shootout, which is always a bit of a rushed job.
And he's no longer managing anymore, but big victory this for Arsene Wenger, who's been campaigning for years to get rid of the away goals rule. He is in a position of football authority now, but of course at FIFA, not even UEFA, the ones who scrapped it.
We've got a few other wacky ideas to come.
Yeah, send us your thoughts if you've got ideas on what should change in football. And Sport on Lot on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, sportonlotpod@gmail.com. Well, perhaps that was one of the least contentious of issues that UEFA has had to grapple with over the last week. The Euros itself has been presenting a lot of challenges for UEFA, particularly politically. If we start with the one they faced with the British government, it was whether or not the Euro 2020 semi-finals and final would even stay at Wembley. There was that brief threat that London could lose the games in the midst of the tournament.
Yeah, there was this issue around whether the UEFA's 2,500 VIPs would get exemptions to come to London. A deal's been done. The government have agreed that can happen. It's now part of legislation. If you're an official invitee, then you can get to come to London. You're supposed to isolate in your hotel unless you're attending Euro 2020 events, but you can come and you don't have to quarantine. in exchange, almost the capacity at Wembley for the semi-finals and the final will now be 75%. That's 65,000 possibly in Wembley for that, and it's there's been a bit of people jumping up and down a bit, saying, "Hang on a minute, how can we have that many people there? Other people can't fly in and out of the country. This is disgraceful." But I think it's been done. It's going to happen, and it's one of those political agreements which happens in sport quite often.
And in England, they have been steadily increasing in the number of fans at games as part of test events since April, and we now do actually have the results from what the government are calling their events research programme, and there were only 28 positive COVID-19 cases from 58,000 people who attended sport and other cultural events in April and May. So take an example of the games at Wembley, the FA Cup semi-final, an FA Cup final, the League Cup final. Well, there were 8 positive cases from 30,000 people attending. So you can see why the government are giving the go-ahead for even bigger crowds over the next few weeks to gradually get to the position of normality in full venues.
I think that's one reason which has given the government the sort of confidence to go ahead and allow Wimbledon. The British Grand Prix is going to have a full capacity at Silverstone, 140,000 people. The Open Golf, all these events are, they're basically allowing people in. It's a difficult one, isn't it? When you have hundreds of thousands of children forced to isolate from school, and this extra attendances being allowed at sports events. It's not an easy one to justify in a way. Depends how you view the whole issue of isolation and social distancing and the whole approach to dealing with COVID, I guess.
Yeah, this government, Martyn, has been particularly friendly towards sports, hasn't it? As far as other events, I mentioned the theatres there and other institutions inside the sort of Department of Culture and Sport. They're still working with heavy restrictions. Sport seems to be a button these guys are happy to press when needs must.
Well, you might think Lewis Hamilton would be completely delighted to have a full crowd back at Silverstone for the race next month, but the Formula One world champion has expressed some unease about the fact there will be up to 140,000 people there on race day at the British Grand Prix. Let's take a listen to what Lewis Hamilton's been saying after that government announcement.
I am excited to see so many people. The selfish part of me, I want to see all the people there, but I turned on the news this morning, and I've been watching it these past days, and I know that UK rates have increased since people are loosening up a little bit, and not everyone is vaccinated.
Lewis Hamilton, who doesn't shy away from giving an opinion these days from the F1 paddock. Be interesting to see what happens in a few weeks when Formula One goes to Hungary, where we've been focusing a lot on during the Euros because of the controversy over their anti-LGBT laws and the protests, particularly in Germany. And in this second week of the Euros, we've had the moves by the Munich mayor to get the Allianz Arena, which is known as the football arena Munich during the Euros, lit up with the rainbow flag. That appeal was rejected by UEFA, who said it was a political act, and it's left UEFA in an absolute storm of controversy over their handling of this, hasn't it, this week?
It certainly has. I mean, I'm glad I wasn't sitting in UEFA Towers in Switzerland having to make a decision on this one. It was clearly an overt move by the Munich City Council and the mayor of Munich to declare that this was a protest against Hungary, and they wanted to do it when Hungary were visiting Munich. So that put UEFA in a pretty tricky position. I think if they'd just said, we want to light the stadium in rainbow colours without mentioning Hungary, they would probably have said, okay. But
well, I'm not sure about that, Martyn. I'm not sure about that because I think UEFA are treading a very curious line here with the narrative, because I think the DFB, previous to all of this, back in May, had asked in general terms to UEFA, in very general terms, can we light the stadium up in the rainbow colours because of Pride Month? Nothing to do with Hungary, nothing to do with politics. And the kind of back channel answer was no, we'd rather you didn't, and that was in May. So it's interesting to see UEFA look at its rule book, and where it says yes, we can't have political acts, and the Munich mayor did say this would be a political act, it seems, in protest at the Hungarian law.
This is all linked to how the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is railing against what he calls Western Europe's liberal consensus. He claims he's not anti-gay, but he's really has focused these laws that were approved by the Hungarian Parliament on banning the portrayal of the LGBT community or sex reassignment with minors, so under 18-year-olds. And it has been particularly denounced, this legislation, because there is a suggestion that it does link the LGBT community with paedophilia. And obviously it brings back some memories of 2014, the Sochi Olympics, when they'll protest over the Russian law which banned so-called gay propaganda.
Yeah, well, the mayor of Munich, obviously, like many people in Germany and elsewhere, was quite horrified by the law and the kind of stance Hungary is taking, and he said it would be a political protest. And I think that's where UEFA used its rule book to say this can't be done. And like I said, it's clear. Well, it seems like the DFB had asked before any of this whether they could light the stadium, and through back channels, UEFA have said no. It'd be interesting to know why UEFA had said no at that point. And you saw the backlash, and it ended up with a curious situation where UEFA had to put a very strange statement out on the day they put the rainbow colours on their own Twitter account. They got quite a big backlash that day.
I mean, the UEFA statement talked more about believing in a more equal society, but it didn't mention sexuality specifically. It was only inferred. It just referenced gender. And in all this, I wonder how different it would have played out if the request had come in from the Munich mayor, they just allowed them to light the stadium, and UEFA had actually just never put any sort of statement out, either criticising it or indeed endorsing it. So it was almost like left as, well, it's something Munich just did. It's their stadium.
Yeah, that would have been a good approach. I mean, it has been an absolute maelstrom of disgust expressed towards UEFA over this, and I think they're certainly licking their wounds about it. And I think you're probably right. There should have been a much more inventive way of allowing the stadium to be lit up. I think most people now think, this legislation against that Hungary have put in place has no place in modern society. So you can understand why there's so many people up in arms about this.
And throughout this week, LGBT rights in the Olympic world have been very much in the focus too. That's after Laurel Hubbard, the New Zealand weightlifter, became the first transgender athlete to qualify to compete at Olympic Games. A big moment for her, but certainly one that has divided the sporting world.
It doesn't just divide the sporting world; it actually divides society. I think the whole issue of trans women competing in women's sport is one of the most divisive issues in sport at the moment. It really splits opinion completely down the middle. There's no easy answer to it. It's on the one hand, you have people, including former Olympic athletes such as Sharon Davis, the British swimmer, saying it's unfair that the women who had the benefit of sort of male testosterone up until the point they transitioned are now competing against women who've never had that testosterone advantage, and that reducing testosterone now doesn't make enough difference. And then on the other hand, you have trans women's supporters saying these trans women are women, they have every right to compete as women, and sport should be inclusive. and that it is actually discriminating against them not to allow this to take place.
Well, Hubbard has met the IOC criteria. What they specify is actually you have to record a maximum reading of 10 nanomoles per litre of testosterone, but that is at least 5 times more than a biological woman. As for the rules, they say that she can compete.
Yeah, she's done. That's the first thing. Like, to be clear, Laurel Hubbard has done absolutely nothing wrong. She competed in these trials. She got the weight. She followed the rules and has qualified for the Olympics. I mean, unfortunately for her, she's become a lightning rod for the issue, and that's unfortunate. But it was always going to be someone. The first person to do anything often becomes the poster child for whatever issue. Unfortunately for her, this one is an extremely contentious one, and one where I guess the science and the rules, they just haven't caught up with where they need to be in time for the Olympics. So some people will say they never will because this is an intractable situation. Sex is different to gender, etc. And is it inclusion versus competitive science? Is it fair on women? There's all these conflicting issues that some people say can never be resolved.
We are lucky enough to have 2 guests on the pod to talk about this very complex issue. Earlier on, I spoke to Kristen Worley, who is a former high-performance Canadian cyclist and transgender woman who is a survivor. She has been the first person to successfully sue the International Olympic Committee for human rights violation and win after she was gender tested while she was trying to compete in the 2008 Beijing Olympics. She won a victory there, and she is now advising the IOC on the future of trans women in sport. This is what she said.
I was the first athlete in the world to be go through these policies, where I was gender tested, where I was psychologically and physically violated, and then for over years oppressed because of what I knew from high level sport, from the IOC, from the UCI down through WADA, and even my own government of Canada engaged in it.
What's your view of the fact that some people say it's unethical for people to be told that they need to take testosterone suppressants, hormone suppressants, because that's affecting their personal lives, and just in order to comply with some sort of sports regulation.
To look at the idea of making somebody unwell to participate in sport is unethical. That is an issue of design when we're thinking about inclusion. A lot of the conversation around testosterone, there is a fair amount of accuracy to how it's being discussed, but not in terms of something that is transgendered, because there is multiple different types of physiologies, which we can talk about right now. But the more important thing is that we have to understand that the physiologies in terms of the individuals that we're talking about is that what you're asking somebody to do is to assimilate somebody who is 46XY karyotype to somebody that is 46XX karyotype. The genders will never meet. They will never. The physiologies do not function the same. Martyn, just as just to help this our discussion. So for you are 46XY karyotype. Your sole primary hormone is testosterone. Okay. A female or a person who is 46XX karyotype, separate of the sex of the body, has 2 primary hormones, which is progesterone and estrogen, which is also anabolic in the physiology, and the secondary hormone is testosterone. Okay, and Mother Nature has done that purely for health and well-being, more importantly for reproduction health. So in terms of when we talk about it in this particular case of the sciences, by reducing the hormones, so in terms of somebody who is transgendered, okay, these sciences already exist, okay? Not in the context of transgender, in the context of hypogonadism, okay? We know hypogonadism. WADA has policies on hypogonadism. We know the XY karyotype, 46XY karyotype impacts to the physiology by reducing the hormones in the human physiology. There's therapeutic use exemptions already created by WADA that already established, because we understand the impacts of low testosterone in the reasons why we have therapeutic exemptions through increased testosterone based on therapeutic exemptions to help maintain individual health and ability to participate actively in healthy and long-term sport. Okay, so that would be somebody who was transgendered, who has not gone through the surgical intervention of their body, somebody who is a transition athlete like myself, or somebody like Laurel Hubbard. That is the reconstruction of the vulva. So that is actually removing the gonads from the human physiology. So that means ovaries and testicles are the key development areas of hormone development and health and well-being. But what people are not talking about is when you go through the surgical intervention of the physiology, you're actually disrupting the endocrine system.
What would your hope be for how sport, society views this whole very sort of divisive issue? Do you just hope it's not an issue anymore, and that
it's happening because originally the IOC never did the work in the first place? And that's why I became a survivor in the process, because I was violated here in Canada all those years ago by individuals, by 8 men who felt that through policy that had no science and research to it, that they felt they could do this to me, that they had a right to do it to me. And then in fact, I deserved it. And that somehow I was a threat to sport, which was completely contradictory to the facts. And here we are in 2021, and I've been working privately with the IOC over the last 18 months. And this has actually been, and I want to be able to say to you, in fairness to my colleagues at the IOC, this has been a process of which we've had this harmful relationship, to which I've gone through a process of healing. It's been a healing process for me, and also a process of forgiveness, because at the end of the day, we had to walk across the bridge together to ensure that this doesn't happen to anyone else.
With Laurel Hubbard participating in the Olympics in Tokyo, what's your message to people, to society around the fact she's competing? What would you say to people who challenge the fact whether she should be there, or people who say she's absolutely correct to be there?
This has nothing to do with Laurel. When you ask me that question, the question is really that we did not design the system of sport, right? We failed in the design. We failed Laurel, just like I was failed as an athlete all those years ago, where I was violated and now a survivor and having to live with the impact of this. The issue is not around fairness. The issue is around design. The issue is we failed in the design process. There is no infrastructure for Laurel to be supported in Tokyo, period. She's going with absolutely no support. The design of the system is not there to support her because we never did the work in the first place. Okay, so the issue is that is our failure. And in terms of, we are not smart enough as society yet. We have not evolved enough as society to ensure the safety and well-being of her participation, let alone other athletes in this diversity, but let alone other diversities within the realms of sport, elite sport, let alone the Olympic system.
Great to get the views there of Kristen Worley. Well, we turn to South Africa now, and joining us is the sports scientist Ross Tucker in Cape Town. Ross, welcome to Sport Unlocked.
Hey, how's it, Rob? Thanks for having me on.
Ross, I'm very keen to get your assessment of this discussion about how fair is it that Laurel Hubbard is able to compete at these Olympics?
The issue is that we have women's sports separate from men's for very good reasons. The main one is that there are biological differences between females and males, which have profound performance implications for those two sexes. And so the separation is done on the basis of biological sex. And what you have in the form of Laurel Hubbard is someone who grew up and developed with the benefits of male biology. In this case, what that means really is testosterone, which causes increased muscle mass, increased strength, less body fat, different skeleton, heart, lungs, and then transitions to become and identify as a woman. And the question for people is that fair? So do you carry over these physiological advantages even after you suppress testosterone for a long time and undergo the gender reassignment? Or do you lose those advantages? And the biology is quite clear at the moment, I think, is that when you make the transition, you can take away a small proportion of the advantages, but to a large degree, they are retained. And so therefore, inclusion, which is the social or societal imperative, comes at the expense of fairness. I think that's the current scientific conclusion based on the evidence, and that's why it's controversial.
Some of the people think that actually even taking testosterone suppressants or blockers is unfair on transgender athletes because it affects their health, their well-being, and actually, I mean, the counter argument is that there should be a sort of open, no restrictions at all. That if people identify as women, they should be able to compete as women. But it just seems that this is probably the most divisive issue in sport at the moment. The anger on both sides of the argument seems to be really intense. I mean, I imagine you've encountered some of that anger yourself.
Yeah, this is without a doubt the most controversial. I think it's an unsolvable issue. Sports have historically tried to balance inclusion. In other words, let's allow trans women to compete in women's sport with fairness and safety. And at the moment, the evidence pretty comprehensively says that you cannot balance those imperatives. The testosterone thing you mentioned was sports' attempt to do that. The logic was that if these biological differences were created by testosterone, then if we take that testosterone away, we will remove the difference, and therefore we will establish some kind of performance fairness. As I say, there are now more than a dozen studies that pretty strongly suggest that that doesn't happen. But then on the other side, you've got people who are arguing for an even more extreme approach, which is really that you should simply identify. Now, if that were to happen, then women's sport would effectively end because it would be open to anyone. And if you have a category, and this is not unique to sex, by the way, because you think about combat sports, there are weight categories for heavyweights to be kept separate from lightweights, because if you didn't do that, the sport would lose its meaning. There are also age categories. We don't let 27-year-old footballers play in the under-20 World Cup. And so the moment you create these categories for protections of fairness and safety, you have to defend them. You have to be able to exclude people. And that's what this boils down to. The problem is, and the reason it comes to such a head and such a hostile environment, is that socially, I think it's decent to accept people for how they identify. And sport wants to mirror society. We all get that. And so where societal decency says let people do what they wish, sport can't necessarily do that because it becomes a colliding rights issue. And that upsets people to the degree that it is very hostile. And, Hubbard's participation in the Olympics is it makes this real instead of abstract. But it's also really unfortunate because it's going to be so, I think, unpleasant for her. And it's going to raise so many unpleasant dialogues around Tokyo.
Laurel, the individual, she's respected the rules here, right? I mean, she's just gone through the process as designed and has qualified. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So almost 20 years ago, the first transgender policies were created, and they've evolved a little bit since then. But right now, they say that as long as you keep your testosterone levels below a certain level, which is 10 nanomole per liter, for 12 months, then you're eligible. And so she would have transitioned and participated under that policy. So you certainly can't accuse her of deliberately doing something like a doper would be doing. So that's why it's unfortunate that she's almost the personification of this. Because she's abiding by the rules. I just think that those rules aren't fit for purpose for the sake of women.
Which makes me wonder, and Ross, you must have thought this too, perhaps. Why has it taken so long? We still aren't there, I suppose, in terms of the rules. Like this was coming, right? For a number of years, this situation that sport finds itself, weightlifting finds itself. Why are there not rules? Why was the science not in place? Now we understand the IOC is carrying out a study now. What was going on to put Laurel in this situation, to put sports in this situation, in year 2021?
if trans women are included in women's sport, it has implications for biological females, the women for whom the category is intended. They didn't consider it that way. It seems to me they only evaluated it from the perspective of the trans athletes, and they said that they would look to include. So their default was inclusion unless you could show otherwise. What's happened is that a number of studies have shown otherwise. And whilst we don't have a perfect study, we certainly have enough research to suggest that, as I said, inclusion happens at the expense of fairness. But they weren't considering that at the time. They were simply looking to facilitate inclusion. And it's only with the benefit of some hindsight that I think the folly of that has been shown up.
How do you balance out respecting someone's identity and what's turned into decisions based on scientific investigations and sporting level playing fields? Well, at the heart of it all, it's obviously is someone's own mind, their own feelings, and not wanting to seem to be sort of part of studies or sort of having their identity diluted in some way.
I don't know if you can, and that's why this is unsolvable. If your intention is to get a situation that keeps everyone happy, I don't think that situation exists here, which is unfortunate. As I said, authorities tried with their sort of testosterone fix to solve that problem, but I don't think you can. And so ultimately, I think what sports federations have to do is they have to look at the three imperatives, which are safety in some sports, weightlifting less so, fairness and inclusion. And they have to say which of those three is a priority to us. And, when World Rugby did this last year and said safety first, fairness second, and unfortunately inclusion is the third of those, partly because remember that inclusion means exclusion, because competitive sport especially is a zero-sum game. So the presence, for instance, of Laurel Hubbard means the absence of someone else who otherwise might have been there. And so inclusion then became impossible to provide for everyone, and therefore the other two took precedence. And that, unfortunately, is the biological reality.
Do you think, Ross, that if we are going to have this situation, as you say, it's unsolvable, if we are going to have trans athletes participating in women's sport in the Olympics, is there any point having the testosterone rule there? Or if you think if we're going to go down that road, which we are down that road, should we just accept the fact that trans women, if they are going to compete, and that they shouldn't have to follow these testosterone rules? Or do you think that is the sort of the next best thing?
Yeah. So at first glance, that people say, well, that's a really straightforward question. It's actually interesting because it raises certain medical, ethical issues. And the main one is that if you, as a sports federation, compel people to lower their testosterone in order to achieve fairness, but it doesn't work. In other words, you don't achieve the fairness because lowering the testosterone doesn't actually take away those biological advantages. Then there's a real ethical question about whether a sport can intervene on an athlete's medical regimen. And so, in actual fact, it might one day transpire that there's a human rights issue where trans women are saying, but we don't want to lower the testosterone, and it doesn't actually even work. And so therefore the policy can't stand for that reason. So it's not completely unforeseeable that will be challenged in the same way that the policy that governs, say, Caster Semenya, the DSD policy, has been challenged on medical grounds. But I think my sense is that there is too much resistance to simply opening the category up. I think everyone understands that you cannot simply allow self-ID. And while there are people who are arguing for that, I think many, even people who are very, let's call them socially permissive and who argue for inclusion, I think they would draw a line before it becomes just open ID.
Ross, just in a very sort of simple sense as well, can we talk about combat sports a little bit? I saw you've been quite active on Twitter and talking to people, exchanging opinions, etc. And there was one of the guys was talking about algorithms, etc. But let me ask you, when it comes to, say, something like boxing, what are the risks if the two athletes are both the same weight?
Yeah, so if we might step back on the biology, the performance difference between male and female, which are the result of the biology that I mentioned earlier, differ depending on the event. So, for instance, in running, cycling, and swimming, males at the top level or at high school level, any matched comparative level, outperform the best females by between 10 and 15%. When it comes to power, that difference is 30%. And when it comes to strength, particularly upper body strength, shoulders and arms, the difference is between 30 and 60%. Even when you match for mass, that difference is 30%. So two individuals who weigh the same, one is male, one is female, the male will be typically, or at the elite level, about 30% stronger. Now, those variables, muscle mass, muscle strength, size, and power, combine to create what has been measured as a punching power difference of 260%. So that's how much more powerfully males can punch compared to females. Now, given that combat sports have such a high risk of injury, particularly brain injuries, I can't see how anyone could in good conscience allow that situation to occur, even within weight categories. You know, people often say, let's just match for weight. And they already have weight categories in men's sport and in women's sport. Because if you cross them over, the power difference and the strength difference at the same weight, in my opinion, creates huge risks for female fighters. So I can't see how that safety risk can be overlooked by a sport. You can just imagine the liability if a biological female was to fight without giving consent against a biological male who's undergone that development. It feels to me like the single biggest risk for this entire situation.
Well, thanks a lot for joining us and for all your insight today on Sport Unlocked.
Sure, thanks very much. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Well, as we look ahead towards the Olympics, we discovered this week that there's one big name who won't be going to Tokyo, having failed at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Tariq, full of
Chinese swimmer Sun Yang, he had an appeal against an 8-year ban that was overturned in very strange circumstances earlier this year. This CAS panel had banned him for that period of time after finding that he pretty much destroyed testing vials and refused to give samples to doping testers a few years ago. The verdict was overturned after his lawyers managed to prove that the former Italian foreign minister, Frattini, had used racist and anti-Chinese language on Twitter. I think it's the first time I'd ever seen anything like that happen. The case went back to CAS instead of an 8-year ruling, 8-year ban. Sun Yang has been banned for 4 years and 3 months, meaning he'll miss Tokyo, but curiously, the ban ends just in time for him to appear should he want, which is what he said he will if he competes, if he manages to get the qualifying time for Paris in 2024, one of those half in, half out CAS rulings, which we've become used to in recent times. Martyn, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, he's a very controversial figure in swimming. We've had swimmers before, the Australian Mac Horton. He's called him a drug cheat at the 2016 Rio Olympics, refused to share the podium with him at the World Championships in 2019. He's previously served a doping ban in 2014. It was only 3 months, but he even said it was a doping ban. So it's a lot of people think he's got away very lightly to have his ban halved.
And there's no getting away from just how big a figure he is in the world of swimming. The fact is he won 11 golds at Swimming World Championships from 2011 to 2019. It really just shows what a huge star he is in the world of swimming, and to have him banned from the Olympics and amid so much controversy and concerns about his own conduct is really damaging for swimming, isn't it?
Well, he's not just only big in swimming. In China, obviously with that population, he is by far the most popular athlete in China. So you can imagine people say you had David Beckham and Michael Jordan, roll them together. That is what Sun Yang represented to, or represents to China and Chinese sports. And that's probably why FINA, the world swimming body, actually refused to ban him. This only went to CAS after the World Anti-Doping Agency appealed against FINA refusing to do anything about this. And to be honest, it was pretty cut and dried. It was all quite damning, the evidence, and he's eventually banned. But again, curiously, FINA again, which didn't want to ban him, changed its rules on how many months and how many years athletes who are caught doping are banned for. Hence, the 8-year ban he initially got was reduced to 4 years because FINA changed its rules. They clearly want a Chinese superstar in their ranks.
Not the only big doping issue of the week. Surprise, surprise. The world of weightlifting embroiled in yet another scandal. A culture of corruption is being found with covered up doping cases. These are for athletes who won Olympic and world titles. And we've had it all uncovered by an international testing agency investigation. But like so many things, it originally stemmed from the media. The German broadcaster ARD investigated.
Yeah, probably no surprise to many people that weightlifting has a doping scandal. Probably the sport where doping makes the single biggest difference to performance. So that's why this is going to happen. But I mean, some amazing things have come out of this. For example, one of the findings was a Romanian athlete who won a silver medal at the London 2012 Olympic Games. That happened within weeks of 2 offences of testing positive for steroids, and she competed with the full knowledge and complicity of the chiefs who were in charge of the International Weightlifting Federation at the time.
The other really interesting takeaway from that report actually was the conduct of WADA or lack of interest. It seems like at that time, everyone says things have changed, but 140 unprocessed positive cases over many years. And it seemed from that report that WADA would just check up and say, what are you going to do about that? They'd receive an email. So, yeah, we're looking into it. And then it would just happen over and over again. But none of this was followed up with. There were no sanctions. WADA didn't put any real pressure on the Weightlifting Federation, which has now meant that 26 of those cases are now time barred. So whoever these athletes are, they can't be punished. They may have won medals, and the world moves on. It's just total disgrace for weightlifting and the anti-doping community.
And the IOC has warned that weightlifting's place actually even at the Olympics is in jeopardy. Can it be trusted? Is it actually implementing the reforms wanted? There is a interim president of the International Weightlifting Federation at the moment, Michael Irani, and they're showing some sort of elements of contrition and wanting to move on in terms of recovering from what he called the dark days. But as my colleague Graham Dunbar noted in his report, he actually previously served on the executive board under the previous president who resigned his membership of honorary of the IOC last year. And, he was certainly caught up in this Lord of the Lifters investigation that was led by ARD.
The former president, Thomas Ajan, he's been in there for over 40 years, 40, in charge of weightlifting, which again tells you the story here. But one of the incredible things here, while he was covering up all this doping, was he also held a position on the foundation board of the World Anti-Doping Agency. I mean, Fox, Henhouse, all the whichever analogy you want to make, it's a mess. And I don't know. Like you said, the media find these things out, hand-wringing, investigations, and this must not happen again until the next one. It seems to be a culture, a systemic problem within sports where these people wear multiple hats. They are all pals, amounts of conflicts of interest galore, and things just seem to come out. And again, we talked about this on last week's pod and other ones about kind of independent regulation of sport. Last week might have been about the UK, but global sport, whether it's FIFA or whether it's UEFA or any weightlifting in this case, who is looking at these sports bodies? It's a disgrace. Maybe it will take something like kicking weightlifting out of the Olympics for something to happen, for real change to happen. Is that what could happen?
Well, the IOC have always been very reluctant to expel any sport. I mean, they threatened to do it with boxing with the corruption around the results there. That's not happened. Wrestling lost its status, but only very briefly. They won that back again, didn't they? So I think getting these core Olympic sports out of the program is very difficult, because the IOC politicians, they don't like to make themselves unpopular, and that's what would happen. They would be unpopular amongst a group of people who elect them.
Well, we are now just a month away from the reluctant Olympics, perhaps as they're being seen in many parts of the world, particularly Japan, where there are many reservations about the games going ahead. And we now know that numbers will be limited for Japanese people to even go into the Olympic venues, with a restriction on the numbers finally agreed in the last few days.
Yeah, they may be reduced or changed further on July the 12th. But as far as we know, we're going to have 10,000 local fans maximum attending the venues. Interesting, the whole arrangements around Tokyo, particularly, I think, this issue about the monitoring of people's movement, not supporters and spectators so much, but media and athletes. They're all going to be tracked with GPS trackers. Is that right? Have you heard about that, Tariq?
Yeah, that's right. So you have to download an app. You have to also provide the organisers with something called your activity plan, which will tell them where you're supposed to be pretty much every hour of your time. And for foreign journalists, you have to quarantine for the first 14 days, meaning the only way you leave your hotel room or wherever you're staying is to go to work. And they have to know where you're going to be working at all times. You can't use public transport. It's going to be an Olympics like no other, and one that you feel is being forced on the people of Japan is just taking place because it kind of has to take place in order to save, I suppose, the IOC in a way, and the $3 to $4 billion of television revenue that it seeks to make from these games. And I suppose the 11,000 or so athletes who have trained for this. But for that country of 120 odd million, who majority seem to still not want this, to have this sort of placed upon them is a real strange set of events. And just talking about their supporters, Martyn, there are going to be restrictions on them too. Those fans who can go into the stadiums and the arenas, they have to be really quiet, no shouting, no high fives. You have to wear a mask at all times. It's kind of like going to watch snooker, but at every single event. It's going to be very strange.
And booze is banned from the athletes' village. Well, in communal place at least. They've got to take it to their rooms only, haven't they, to drink? And then they're not going to be mixing with anyone else because they've got to socially distance in their rooms and around the village.
Yeah, alcohol is banned everywhere. They did a U-turn on that. They said that spectators could initially buy it, then they've said no alcohol can be purchased in the venues, and you can't. I think you can't even have two people drinking together in the athletes' village, or so. Yeah, it's going to be not much fun once you finish doing your swimming. It's going to be straight back home, I think.
Well, it'd be a cheap round for the athletes in the Olympic Village who have to only drink alone, and a cheap round for us because we're yet to be reunited in the same place again, but hopefully that will come soon. Great chatting to you guys as ever.
Yeah, it's been brilliant, guys. But really interesting, really good guests, and really good to have you, Tariq, Panja.
Nice to be with you again, guys. Thanks for having me.
If you've got any thoughts, message them to us at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, sportunlockedpod@gmail.com. And if you are enjoying us, be really grateful if you could subscribe to us on whichever platform you're listening to us on, and perhaps even rate us too. For now, enjoy the sports viewing in the days ahead, and we'll speak soon. Goodbye.